When both you and the person full of themselves go quiet, the world doesn't just get calm. It explodes in its own way because in that moment, someone finally loses control, and it is not you. Most people assume that when both sides are silent, the story is over, but the truth is much more complex. This is when the person full of themselves enters their real psychological breakdown, and when your healing truly starts. Stay with me because what happens next is the part no one prepares you for. If this already feels strangely familiar, stay here. You need to understand the mental place you are stepping into, because knowing this is how you stop the harmful cycle for good. Let us look deeper. When both you and the person full of themselves stop talking, the first thing that happens on their side is what I call the figuring out phase. It is subtle, it is mental, and it is something most people miss because it happens quietly behind the scenes, long before the person full of themselves does anything. When you become quiet, you feel it as an emotional change, a boundary, a step toward getting better. But the person full of themselves doesn't see your quietness that way. They treat it as information. Your lack of reply becomes something they must solve, not something they respect. They start checking how they lost their grip, not how they hurt you. People full of themselves do not reflect on themselves the way healthy people do. Instead, they analyze you. Did you get distracted? Are you trying to punish them? Has someone else entered your life? Are you testing them? They look for an advantage, a reason, a possible threat. Your quietness becomes a puzzle they need to solve because they hate uncertainty. During this figuring out, they may not reach out at all. Their quietness is not indifference, it is strategy. They might watch what you do online, observe your friends, or notice who talks to you. They are gathering details, waiting for your next emotional move. People full of themselves believe that people they once controlled will always come back. So your quietness is not seen as an end. It is seen as temporary resistance. This is why they don't panic right away. Instead, they hold back, expecting you to break the silence first, just as you may have in the past. They rely on the patterns they created in you, the guilt, the fear of conflict, the desire for peace. They expect you to give in. When you do not, their figuring out becomes more intense. They start wondering if their influence is fading, and that is when the real danger begins for them. Quietness in their world is never meaningless. It is either a chance to gain back power or a threat to their ego. And the longer you stay quiet, the more they feel the ground shake beneath them because your quietness breaks the power dynamic they depended on. When both sides go quiet, the emotional experience is completely different for you than for the person full of themselves. And this difference shows a difficult truth. You feel the loss, but they feel the discomfort. When you stop reaching out, you often carry the full weight of what happened. You are dealing with the emotional mess, the broken trust, the unanswered questions, and the mental exhaustion. You may feel sadness, withdrawal, confusion, or guilt. You are mourning not just the relationship, but the version of yourself that accepted so much. Your quietness comes from emotional overload. You have reached a moment where your mind and body cannot handle any more chaos. You are trying to reclaim space, respect, and clarity. That inner struggle is heavy and it affects your sleep, your self-worth, your memories, and your sense of who you are. Meanwhile, the person full of themselves does not understand quietness with emotional depth. They do not sit with the loss the way you do. They do not think about what went wrong, how they hurt you, or what needs to change. Instead, their first reaction comes from discomfort. Your quietness breaks their routine, not their heart. They are used to having access to your attention, your replies, your apologies, your care, even your arguments. All of that fed their sense of importance. When you go quiet, that supply of validation instantly stops. This does not break them emotionally. It simply annoys them. They feel the lack of supply the same way someone feels when a service they rely on suddenly shuts down. It is a break, a delay, an irritation, they are not thinking, I lost someone meaningful. They are thinking, why are they not answering? Your pain and their discomfort exist in two very different psychological realities. You are mourning the relationship while they are checking their access. You are rebuilding yourself while they are calculating how your quietness affects their ego. You feel the emptiness. They feel the interruption. And as time passes, this difference becomes even more obvious. You slowly start to realize how heavy the emotional load truly was and how much of yourself you muted to keep the peace. They begin wondering why something that used to work so easily, your emotional responsiveness, is suddenly no longer working. The unevenness becomes clear. Your quietness pushes you deeper into reflection and healing, while it pushes them into annoyance and a feeling of being entitled. The emotional weight you carry is deep. The discomfort they feel is linked not to losing you, but to losing the convenience of your compliance. When both sides go quiet, the person full of themselves does not take that quietness as a pause or a mutual break. They take it as a challenge to their ego, because quietness from someone they believe they controlled feels like rebellion. The person full of themselves sees relationships through a mindset of control, not equality. So when you stop replying, stop reaching out, and stop giving them attention, it breaks the psychological structure they thought they built. They see your quietness as defiance, even if you simply wanted peace or clarity. In their view, quietness is never just quiet. It is an offense, it is resistance, it is proof their grip might be weakening. This is why quietness affects them more than any argument. Arguments give them importance. Your reactions give them fuel. Even anger reminds them they still matter in your emotional world. But quietness removes them from the center, and that threatens the fragile story they depend on. Your quietness forces them to face the possibility that they are not as necessary or dominant as they imagined. People full of themselves cannot handle uncertainty, and your lack of communication creates exactly that, a space they cannot control or understand. Instead of seeing your quietness as a healthy boundary, they treat it like an aggressive action. This is when their thinking becomes twisted. They may tell themselves you are being disrespectful, ungrateful, or manipulative. They may assume your quietness is a trick, not a sign of being exhausted or protecting yourself. Some people full of themselves shift into competition, seeing the quietness as a battle they must win. Others frame it as betrayal, convincing themselves you abandoned them, even if they mistreated you for years. They twist the meaning of your quietness to protect their ego, not to understand you. As this inner tension grows, the person full of themselves' sense of control weakens. Your quietness becomes a mirror, showing them their own insecurity. And instead of sitting with that discomfort, they start creating stories that restore their sense of superiority. They may assume you will eventually return because you always did. Or they may plan ways to punish you emotionally for not playing your part. In their mind, quietness threatens their ego because it suggests something they cannot handle. You may no longer be under their psychological influence. When both sides stop talking, something very different starts happening in them compared to you. For you, quietness feels like space to breathe, time to think, time to understand what you lived through. But for the person full of themselves, your absence creates a psychological empty space that forces them to face something they spend their entire lives avoiding, the loss of control. They do not think in terms of mutual space or mutual boundaries. They see your quietness as a break in the system they built to support who they are. People full of themselves do not operate from inner worth. Their self-esteem depends on the reactions, attention, and validation of people around them. You were part of that system. Your emotions, your replies, your pattern of returning after conflict, all of that strengthened their sense of power. When you go quiet, you interrupt that system. And that interruption exposes them. It forces them to face their dependence on your attention, something they do not want to admit. They built a story where they were the one in charge. Your quietness challenges that story. Without your reactions, they have nothing to push against, nothing to manipulate, no proof of their power. This absence becomes a threat, not because they care about you in a real emotional way, but because it shakes the foundation of control that made them feel important. This is when their inner world becomes restless. They may go over conversations, look for clues, wonder if someone else has taken your place, or check for ways to regain dominance. The quietness becomes louder for them than it does for you because they do not know what is happening on your side. That lack of visibility removes their illusion that they can predict you. They are suddenly outside of your world instead of at the center of it. And that loss is too hard for them to bear. Their mind shifts from arrogance to worry, from entitlement to suspicion, from confidence to instability, all caused by your absence. When both you and the person full of themselves fall into quietness, it may look like nothing is happening, but internally, the person full of themselves begins moving through expected behaviors to restore control. One common reaction is trying to fill the empty space your absence created through hoovering, baiting, or bringing in a third party. These are not random behaviors, they are psychological tools used when they feel their influence fading. Hoovering starts when they realize your quietness is not temporary. At first, they assume you will return because they had conditioned you in that pattern. When you do not, panic begins. Hoovering is their attempt to pull you back, not because they value you emotionally, but because losing you threatens their ego. They may send a soft message, bring up a memory, or fake a crisis. They may act sorry, thoughtful, or suddenly caring. They change their tone based on what they think will attract you. The go. Al is not connection, it is control. If hoovering does not work or feels too risky, they switch to baiting. Baiting is meant to cause an emotional reaction, positive or negative. The person full of themselves does not care which way your emotions go. They only care about being the cause. They might post something online to trigger jealousy, send a sharp message to make you angry, or create drama to force a reply. Any reaction gives them relevance again. Quietness removes their power, so baiting becomes their way to poke at the wound they caused, hoping you will react just enough to remind them you are still reachable. When those tactics fail, they move up to bringing in a third party. This is when they involve someone else in the situation, a new partner, an ex, a friend, a family member, not for real connection, but to create a story that puts them back in control. They might show off a new relationship, suggest that someone else values them more, or twist your quietness to make themselves look like a victim. The purpose of bringing in a third party is to make you feel insecure, replaced, or unimportant. It is meant to push you into defending yourself or returning to the old pattern. These behaviors are not signs of love, they are signs of dependence. The person full of themselves needs outside supply to maintain a sense of who they are. When you remove that supply, they scramble to fill the gap. Hoovering, baiting, and bringing in a third party are ways to regain dominance, not closeness. Their reactions come from fear, entitlement, and damaged ego, all caused by your quietness. When the quietness continues, something unexpected begins. While you may see the quietness as a step toward peace or an end, the person full of themselves experiences it as growing unease. Your quietness is not seen as calm, it is seen as losing control. Their identity depends on emotion. Stimulation from others. They need attention, admiration, conflict, anything that puts them at the center. When you stop feeding that, they feel an inner collapse. They do not know how to manage themselves without feedback from outside, and your quietness removes that feedback. At first, they may pretend they do not care. They may act distant or unaffected, but it is just a mask. As time goes on, the quietness becomes harder to ignore. Without your attention, their exaggerated self-image starts to crack. They feel insignificant, overlooked, and irrelevant. These feelings are unbearable because they touch their deepest fear, being ordinary or unimportant. While you use quietness to rebuild yourself, they experience that quietness as a threat to their identity. Your nervous system begins to calm. The tension fades, the mental confusion clears. You start remembering who you were before the chaos. Your quietness brings healing. Theirs brings instability. They begin overthinking, imagining scenarios, trying to guess why you are no longer replying. They do not miss the relationship. They miss the reflection of themselves they saw in your reactions. Your quietness heals you. Theirs breaks them apart. You regain parts of yourself. They lose parts of the identity they built. What feels freeing for you becomes frightening for them. This difference exposes the imbalance that existed the whole time. The quietness sets you free, while it slowly breaks them down from within. When the quietness settles, something shifts inside you in a way that feels slow, confusing, and surprisingly comforting. Your nervous system, which has been living in constant alert, finally gets a chance to stop expecting trouble. Relationships with people full of themselves create long-term over-alertness. You learn to guess their moods, reactions, and emotional unpredictability. Your body becomes trained to expect tension even when things seem calm. So when quietness begins, your system does not relax immediately. At first, it does not know how. You may feel uneasy or restless in the quiet. You may think the lack of conflict means something is wrong. That reaction is not weakness, it is biology. Your body has been surviving, but as time passes, the confusion fades. Your mind separates from the chaos. You notice how your thoughts change when you are not waiting for their next outburst. Your sleep slowly gets better. You start feeling moments of peace you have not felt in a long time. This is your nervous system adjusting, realizing the danger is gone. This is the beginning of true healing, the kind that does not need permission, apology, or an end from them. This is when you start reclaiming emotional space that was once drained by their needs and dramas. You rediscover your ability to think clearly, to feel your own emotions without someone twisting them, and to make choices based on your own values instead of living on constant alert. You begin to feel yourself returning after being buried under emotional weight for so long. Small things start to feel different. You notice that your body is not as tense when you wake up. You are not checking your phone with the same fear or urgency. You are not practicing conversations in your mind or preparing for sudden changes in mood. Slowly, your nervous system starts to trust the quietness. It starts to understand that the storm has passed, and in that quiet, something powerful begins to grow, clarity. You start to see the relationship for what it truly was, not what you hoped it could be. You realize the ways you ignored your own needs, how often you apologized when you did nothing wrong, how much of yourself you held back just to keep the peace. These realizations are painful, but they are also freeing because they show you how deeply you were controlled. The quietness becomes your teacher. It helps you understand the patterns, the cycles, and the emotional traps you could not recognize before. You start to see how your kindness was used, how your empathy was drained, and how your desire to fix things kept you stuck in a situation that only harmed you. As this awareness grows, so does your strength. You begin healing in ways that feel slow but steady. You gain emotional space to think, to breathe, to remember who you were before the chaos. You reconnect with parts of yourself that were ignored or silenced. You start to feel emotions that belong to you, not ones controlled or manipulated by someone else. You realize the quietness is not empty. It is full of your own voice returning. Meanwhile, the person full of themselves experiences none of this. Their quietness does not bring healing. It brings irritation, restlessness, and fear of losing control. They do not use the quiet to reflect or change. They use it to plot, to calculate, to question how they can regain the power they believe is slipping away. But you are no longer feeding their ego. You are no longer dancing in their emotional maze. And with each day that passes, your quietness becomes less about them and more about you reclaiming yourself. Your nervous system keeps adjusting. The world feels less heavy. You have more mental clarity. You begin trusting your instincts again. You no longer feel the need to explain yourself or prove your worth to someone who never truly saw it. Instead, you start valuing your peace. You begin choosing yourself, sometimes for the first time in years. The quietness that once felt unsettling now feels necessary. It becomes the space where you learn to live without fear, without confusion, without constant emotional pressure. The more comfortable you become in this quiet, the more you realize how loud the relationship truly was, how it filled your mind, your heart, and your life with noise that was not yours. And the more you settle into this peaceful quietness, the more you understand the power it holds. Your quietness is not a weakness. It is not avoidance. It is not a game. It is healing. It is reclaiming yourself. It is building a new emotional foundation that cannot be controlled by someone else. And without realizing it, you have stepped into a version of yourself that is stronger, clearer, and more grounded than before. Your quietness becomes a space where your true self begins to rise again.